The town sat under a dry, angry sun. Dust moved through the streets like it had somewhere important to go, even though nothing ever changed here. People lived by strict rules, harsher than the heat, and mercy was treated like a weakness. Outsiders feared this place. Even some locals did. And on this day, the whole town gathered around the wooden post in the center square, whispering, pointing, judging. Tied to that post was a young woman named Lily. Her hair was tangled, her dress dusty, and her hands were bound above her head with a rough rope that dug into her skin. Her face was pale, but her eyes told the truth, fear mixed with exhaustion. She stood there trembling as the crowd swelled around her. Some came out of curiosity, others out of boredom, and a few just wanted to see someone punished. That was how things worked here. One mistake could turn you into a spectacle. People whispered the same words over and over. She stole bread. To them, that was enough. A crime, a sin, a reason to shame her in front of everyone. The baker stood near the front, arms crossed, acting like he'd been deeply wronged. It didn't matter that he threw away more old bread each evening than most people could afford to buy. In his mind, a thief was a thief, even if she was hungry, especially if she was hungry. He liked being the man who never bent the rules. Lily didn't defend herself. She didn't cry or beg. She simply stared at the ground, too weak to stand tall, too tired to fight. The truth was simple. She hadn't eaten in days. Her stomach ached, her legs shook, and the world around her blurred at the edges. But nobody cared about that. They cared about the loaf of bread she had taken. Just one. The town had decided she needed to be taught a lesson. They wanted to make an example of her, as if starving people would suddenly stop starving after seeing this. A few women whispered that the punishment was too much. A few men shrugged and walked away. Most stayed, waiting to watch something happen. Anything. Because in this town, someone else's suffering passed the time. And while the sun burned overhead and Lily struggled to breathe, not one person stepped forward to help her. Not yet. But someone was on his way, quiet, steady, and unknowingly about to change everything that was happening in that dusty square. Lily had not always lived this way. There was a time when she had a warm bed, a clean dress, and a mother who sang softly while cooking breakfast. But life does not always ask permission before it changes. Sickness came like a quiet thief in the night, taking her parents one after the other. The neighbors who once smiled now avoided her eyes. Work was scarce, food even scarcer, and a girl alone had little chance in a world where survival cost more than dignity. For weeks she tried to find any kind of job, cleaning, sewing, carrying water, watching children. But no one wanted to hire someone who looked too thin to stand for long. Her shoes wore down, her dress tore. Her voice, once bright, grew small from lack of use. And her hunger became a constant ache that gnawed at her ribs day and night. She slept where she could. Sometimes behind the stables, sometimes under porches, sometimes in the cold space between two old buildings. At night she would curl into a tight ball, trying to stay warm and trying even harder not to cry. Crying wasted too much energy, and she needed every bit she had left just to survive. When she finally reached the town, she hoped things might be different. The place looked busy and full. She thought maybe someone would need help sweeping floors or peeling potatoes. Instead, she found closed doors and quick, dismissive glances. People here walked with their chins high, guarding their own comfort while pretending not to see suffering. Each day she grew weaker. Each step felt heavier. Her stomach hurt so badly that she woke in the middle of the night shaking from the emptiness. She tried drinking water to fool the hunger, but it only made her sick. She scavenged behind the saloon, hoping to find a scrap of something edible, but even the dogs got to the leftovers before she could. By the morning of her arrest, Lily was barely holding herself together. She had gone almost 3 days with nothing but water from a horse trough. Her body felt hollow, her head light, and the world around her tilted every time she tried to stand up straight. That morning she walked past the bakery and the smell hit her like a wave. Warm bread, soft and fresh, its crust golden from the fire. Her legs stopped on their own. She didn't plan to steal anything. She didn't even think she could outrun anyone if she tried. She just stood there, inhaling the scent, feeling her mouth fill with saliva for the first time in days. Inside, the baker shouted orders to his apprentice as they loaded bread onto a wooden tray. The back door stood half open to let the heat out. On a small table near the doorway sat a single loaf cooling in the open air. Lily stared at it. Her vision trembled. Her hands shook. She told herself, just keep walking. She truly meant to. But the hunger inside her felt louder than her thoughts. She stepped closer. She looked around. No one was watching her. The baker was arguing about the temperature of the oven. The apprentice was wiping flour off his apron. Just one loaf. One small loaf that might save her life. Her fingers touched the bread before she even made the decision. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She simply held it against her chest, soft and warm, and whispered, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular. She didn't even take 2 steps before someone yelled, "Thief!" The baker stormed out, face red with anger, acting as if she had stolen the foundation of his entire business. He grabbed her wrist so hard she cried out, though it barely left her lips. She tried to explain, tried to say she hadn't eaten, tried to tell him she only needed a little food, just enough to stand. He didn't care. He dragged her into the street. A crowd formed almost instantly because people loved watching trouble unfold when it wasn't their own. Some shouted for punishment. Some were curious. A few simply wanted a distraction from their dull routines. Lily's mind spun as they tied her to the post. Her legs were shaking too much to resist. She wasn't afraid of pain, she was too tired to fear anything, but she felt ashamed. Not because she took the bread. She felt ashamed because no one looked at her like a person anymore. They looked at her like a problem, something to deal with, something to display so others would stay in line. The sun climbed higher, burning the top of her head. Sweat mixed with dust on her neck. Her lips were cracked. Her throat was dry. And all she could think was how close she had been to that warm loaf in her hands. How for a moment, just a small moment, she believed she might finally eat. Some of the women in the crowd whispered that she looked half dead already. One said she should be pitied, not punished. But no one spoke loudly enough to challenge the way things were done. It was easier to whisper than to stand up. Children pointed at her. Men shook their heads as if her hunger was a personal insult to them. The baker insisted she be left there long enough to teach everyone a lesson. "No mercy for thieves," he repeated proudly. Lily's head drooped as her strength faded. She barely heard the arguments around her anymore. Her stomach twisted in pain. Her legs trembled. Her wrists burned where the rope bit into her skin. She felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness as the world blurred into colors and shapes. She wondered if this was how her story ended, in a dusty town where no one knew her name, punished for trying to stay alive. She wondered if anyone would care enough to notice when she collapsed. But in the distance, someone was watching the scene as he approached. Someone with tired eyes and a grieving heart. Someone who had seen too much loss to let more happen in front of him. Someone who understood hunger, loneliness, and the weight of unfair judgment. And he was getting closer with every step. The crowd grew louder as the sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered off the ground, turning the dusty air into a blur of gold. Lily felt the world drifting in and out of focus, but the voices around her stayed sharp and cruel. They echoed in her ears like stones being thrown. "Serves her right," a man said, his voice dry and cold. "Imagine stealing in broad daylight," another added, as if the loaf of bread had been made of gold. A woman shook her head, pretending to pity Lily. Poor thing, but rules are rules. Yet she didn't step forward to help. The rope pulled tightly at Lily's wrists, cutting deeper each time her weight leaned forward. She tried to steady herself, but her legs shook uncontrollably. Hunger had drained her body long before the sun had begun its assault. Her lips were cracked, her throat too dry to form words, and each breath felt like it scraped against her ribs. A group of young boys stood nearby, throwing small pebbles at her feet as if she were some kind of carnival target. They laughed when she flinched. They whispered to each other, daring one another to get closer. Their excitement had nothing to do with justice. It was entertainment, something to brag about later. Lily didn't look at them. She didn't have the strength. Her head hung low, hair falling like a curtain across her face. She focused on breathing, slow, shaking breaths that kept her from fainting. She didn't want to pass out. She didn't want to look weak, even though weakness was all she had left. The baker stood in front of her like a proud judge. His hands were shoved into his apron pockets, his chin held high. He kept telling everyone the same story, how she appeared out of nowhere, how she snatched the bread, how dangerous it was to let petty crime slide. He made himself the hero of the moment, as if catching a starving girl proved something noble. A few older men crossed their arms and nodded along with him. "If we let one thief go," one of them said, "next thing you know the whole town will be overrun." Overrun by what? Lily wondered weakly. Hunger. But no one cared about the logic of it. Punishment made them feel powerful. Following tradition made them feel safe. And seeing someone weaker, someone who couldn't fight back, gave them a sense of control in a life where most things were out of their hands. A horse trotted by, its rider slowing to look at the crowd. He frowned but didn't stop. He simply shook his head and kept riding, choosing distance over involvement. Others did the same. They passed through, avoiding Lily's empty eyes, avoiding the sight of her shaking arms, avoiding the knowledge that someone was suffering right in front of them. One woman held her small daughter close, whispering, "Don't ever steal. Look what happens." The girl stared at Lily with wide, confused eyes. She didn't understand why the grown-ups were hurting someone who looked more sick than dangerous. Lily tried to swallow, but her throat was too dry. Even breathing hurt. She felt the hot metal taste of fear rising inside her chest, mixing with shame. Shame she never deserved. Shame for being hungry. Shame for being alone. Shame for being the easiest target in a town that needed someone to punish. A fly landed on her cheek, and she didn't even have the strength to brush it away. Sweat slid down her neck. Her vision flickered. The ground beneath her feet swayed as if it were made of water instead of dirt. She blinked hard, trying to stay conscious. Two men standing off to the side argued quietly. "She's just a girl," one muttered. "Then she should have known better," the other replied. Their words floated toward her like dust, small, meaningless, too far away to help. A gust of wind blew through the square, stirring the heat for a moment, giving Lily the faintest hint of relief. But the relief didn't last. The heat closed in again, thick and heavy. Her body sagged forward. The rope groaned under her weight. Her knees buckled, but the binding held her upright, turning her into a prisoner suspended by suffering alone. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, slow and uneven. Every sound around her seemed distant now, muffled shouts, fading laughter, footsteps shifting in the dirt. She could barely focus. She wondered if she might collapse soon, if her body would simply stop fighting. She wasn't afraid of that anymore. She was only afraid that no one would care. Somewhere behind the crowd, someone tried to speak up. A soft voice said she looked ill. Another voice suggested giving her some water, but both were silenced almost instantly. "If you go easy on one thief," the baker barked, "you'll invite a dozen more. Hunger doesn't excuse crime." Hunger excuses nothing, Lily thought bitterly. It only destroys you slowly while the world watches. She tried to lift her head, tried to meet someone's eyes, hoping to see even a flicker of kindness. But all she saw were faces hardened by their own fears and disappointments. Faces turned into stone by the belief that order mattered more than humanity. Her knees wobbled again. The rope scraped her skin raw. She fought to stay upright, even though her body was screaming to give up. She had no strength left, but something inside her refused to let the crowd see her break. Then, in the midst of the noise and the heat, a hush washed over the nearest group. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was a subtle shift, like a breeze moving through a still room. People turned to look toward the end of the street. Bootsteps approached, slow, purposeful, heavy enough to draw attention without forcing it. Someone said, "Who's that?" Someone else whispered a name Lily didn't catch. A few people stepped aside, curiosity pulling them back. Lily didn't lift her head yet. Her strength was hanging by a thread. But she felt a new presence pushing through the crowd. A presence unlike the rest, steady, quiet, not there to watch, not there to mock. Someone was coming closer, walking toward the post where she stood tied and trembling. And the crowd, for the first time all morning, began to fall silent. Samuel arrived without fanfare, without the crack of a whip or the stomp of a proud horse. He came on foot, leading his chestnut mare by the reins, moving with the slow, steady pace of a man who had long grown used to carrying heavy things, sacks of grain, coils of rope, memories he could not put down. His hat cast a shadow across his face, but the lines around his eyes held the unmistakable look of someone who had known sorrow more intimately than most ever would. People stepped aside because Samuel had that kind of presence. He didn't demand space. He simply existed in a way that made others move. Everyone in town knew him, though he rarely came near the square. He lived miles away on a lonely stretch of land. They whispered stories about him, how he lost his wife the winter before, how he buried her under the lone oak tree behind the house, how after that he stopped talking as much, stopped smiling altogether. But he wasn't a cruel man. He never had been. When he reached the edge of the crowd, he saw Lily for the first time. Saw her slumped body, trembling under the weight of the rope. Saw the fear in her half-closed eyes. Saw the way her ribs pressed sharply against her skin. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew suffering when he saw it, and the sight struck something deep inside him, something he thought had died the night his wife took her last breath. Samuel didn't shout. He didn't push. He simply kept walking forward, cutting through the ring of people who parted instinctively. The baker, noticing the shift in attention, puffed up his chest. "Morning, Samuel," he said loudly, as though they were discussing grain prices. "Caught ourselves a thief today." Samuel didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on Lily. The baker followed his eyes and grinned as if proud of the display. "Tried to steal a loaf of bread, my bread, and I won't have it." Still nothing from Samuel. His silence grew heavy, making the baker's expression falter. Close up, Samuel saw the raw skin around Lily's wrists. He saw how her knees buckled every few seconds, how her lips were cracked from dehydration, how she couldn't even lift her head to acknowledge him. A wave of anger, quiet, controlled, and cold, washed through him. "This is unnecessary," a voice muttered from the back of the crowd. But it was too small, too soft. Nothing changed. Samuel stepped closer, until he was only an arm's length away from Lily. She didn't lift her head, but he saw her flinch at the sound of footsteps, saw her tense, expecting more cruelty. For a long moment he didn't move. He just stood there, studying her, feeling the weight of what was happening. The town expected him to join the judgment, to nod approvingly, to pretend this was justice. But Samuel had lived too long and lost too much to confuse punishment with righteousness. He finally turned to the baker. "You tied her up for bread?" Samuel asked, his voice low, almost too calm. The baker straightened, defensive now. "A thief is a thief. Doesn't matter what they take." Someone murmured agreement. Another shifted uncomfortably. The crowd watched Samuel, uncertain of where this was going. Samuel looked at Lily again. She swayed slightly, rope straining as her weak legs struggled to hold her weight. He took in her sunken cheeks, her hunched shoulders, her empty stare. Hunger had hollowed her out. "She's starving," Samuel said. "She's a criminal," the baker snapped. Samuel's jaw tightened, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough for those closest to him to notice. He took a slow breath, the kind a man takes when deciding whether to walk away or to change something. He stepped forward. The baker reached out instinctively. "Hey," Samuel ignored him. He reached into the small pouch tied to his belt and pulled out a short, sharp knife. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant for show. It was the kind of knife ranchers carry to cut rope or leather or stubborn knots. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. "What's he doing? Is he crazy? Samuel, don't interfere." But Samuel didn't hear any of it, or maybe he did and simply didn't care. He raised the knife and cut the rope in one swift, practiced motion. The rope snapped. Lily crumpled instantly, her legs giving out. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground, one arm steady around her shoulders, the other still holding the knife. Silence washed over the square, heavy and stunned. The baker sputtered. You can't just—" Samuel sheathed the knife and lifted Lily slightly, supporting her weight as she tried weakly to stand. She needs food, he said quietly. Somewhere in the back, someone gasped. Another person whispered that Samuel had finally lost his mind after the death of his wife. But most just watched, unsure how to react to someone doing something they had all been too afraid or too unwilling to do. Lily tried to speak, but her voice came out as a faint whisper, more breath than sound. She wasn't even sure what she was trying to say. Her body felt too heavy, too weak, too grateful, too confused. Samuel noticed and adjusted his hold, steady and gentle. There was no pity in his eyes, no condescension, only understanding, a depth of understanding that reached farther than the crowd could ever see. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside were a few pieces of dried meat, a biscuit, and a canteen of cool water. Simple food, rancher food, but to Lily it looked like a feast. He held the water to her lips. The crowd watched. Lily swallowed with difficulty at first, then with desperate relief. Water ran down her chin, but Samuel didn't pull it away. He let her drink until her breathing steadied. The baker made a final attempt. "Samuel, you have no right to." Samuel turned his head just slightly and met the man's eyes. The baker fell silent. There were some men you argued with and some you didn't. Samuel belonged to the second group. He shifted Lily's weight again, preparing to lift her more securely, but paused as her hand weakly touched his sleeve, almost as if she couldn't believe someone was helping her. Samuel looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You're all right now," he said softly. And for the first time since she was tied to the post, Lily felt the faint warmth of hope flicker back to life. Samuel didn't wait for permission, and he didn't ask for it. With one arm holding Lily steady, he guided her away from the post, step by slow step. Her legs shook beneath her like they weren't sure how to work anymore. Every movement looked fragile, like she might collapse again at any second. But Samuel didn't rush her. He walked at her pace, steady, calm, protective. The crowd parted, some reluctantly, some with curiosity, and some with shame creeping into their faces. They had been so loud moments earlier, shouting, pointing, judging. Now they watched in silence as Samuel helped the girl they had all agreed deserved punishment. Lily held onto his sleeve with trembling fingers. She didn't cling out of fear. She clung because she had nothing else to hold onto. Her vision blurred, and each breath felt like a fight. But the man beside her did not let her fall. Samuel led her until they reached the shade of a nearby building. The air was still hot, still dry, but at least the sun wasn't burning her skin anymore. Gingerly, he lowered her to sit against the wall. She sagged down with a soft groan, exhaustion washing through her. Samuel crouched beside her, opened the cloth bundle again, and placed a small piece of biscuit into her hand. Lily stared at it, her eyes wide and disbelieving. She looked like someone who had forgotten what food even felt like. "Eat," Samuel said, his voice low and steady. "Eat first." Those two words reached her more deeply than anything she'd heard in a long time. Not "why did you steal?" Not "what were you thinking?" Not "explain yourself." Simply, "eat first." Her throat tightened. She blinked hard as her eyes filled with tears, slow, hot, silent tears that traced paths down her dusty cheeks. She lifted the biscuit to her mouth with shaking hands and took a small bite. It felt almost foreign, as if her body wasn't sure how to accept the food at first. But the flavor hit her tongue, and she chewed slowly, savoring every crumb like it was the finest meal in the world. When she swallowed, her entire body seemed to sigh from the inside out. The crowd in the square didn't fully disperse. People lingered, watching from a distance. They whispered among themselves. Some were angry, calling Samuel foolish. Some were confused, but a few felt something else: guilt, maybe, or the uncomfortable sting of seeing kindness they hadn't had the courage to show. Samuel ignored all of them. He handed Lily the canteen again, and she drank carefully, taking small sips so she wouldn't make herself sick. He watched her without staring, giving her enough space to feel safe but staying close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. When she had eaten all that her trembling stomach could handle, she leaned her head against the wall and whispered, "Thank you." The words came out thin and broken, barely louder than a breath. Samuel nodded once. He didn't need a speech. He didn't need her gratitude. The simple truth that she could breathe again was enough for him. After a pause, he asked softly, "What's your name?" Lily." Her voice cracked on the sound. He repeated it quietly. "Lily," as if committing it to memory, as if it mattered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Samuel rested one hand on his knee and scanned the square, making sure no one tried to approach her, but no one dared. The baker had stomped back into his shop, muttering under his breath. The children's curiosity had faded now that the spectacle was over. The rest of the townspeople drifted away little by little, leaving Samuel and Lily mostly alone. When she could finally manage a deeper breath, Samuel asked, "How long since you last ate?" Lily hesitated, ashamed to answer. She looked down at her hands, thin, scraped, trembling. "2 days, maybe 3. I lost count." Samuel's jaw tightened again, not in anger at her, in anger at the situation that made her desperation possible. The world had a way of crushing the wrong people. "Why were you alone?" he asked, his tone gentle. "My parents," her voice faded. "They died. I've been traveling, trying to find work. Anyone who'd take me." Samuel listened, never interrupting, never judging. He didn't press her for more. He could see the exhaustion hanging on her like a second skin. She spoke slowly, as if each word cost her energy she barely had. "I wasn't trying to do wrong," she whispered. "I just couldn't walk anymore, and the bread, it smelled so warm." Her eyes filled again with tears she tried to hide. She didn't sob. Tears simply spilled, quiet and unstoppable. Samuel took a deep breath. He didn't touch her, didn't force comfort on her. Instead, he spoke in that steady voice, a voice that had once soothed wild horses and frightened calves and a wife who battled illness. "You did what you had to," he said. "No one can blame you for needing to survive." But they all had, and they had been ready to let her die for it. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, overwhelmed by the sudden kindness. After so long alone, the gentleness in Samuel's voice felt almost unreal. He stood slowly and held out a hand. "You can't stay here," he said quietly. "You need rest, food, safety." Lily stared at his hand. She wanted to take it, but fear flickered in her tired eyes. Fear of trusting the wrong person, fear of being a burden, fear of hoping again. Samuel saw the hesitation. He didn't withdraw his hand. He kept it steady, offering, not forcing. "I won't harm you," he said, "and I won't leave you tied to a post." That last line hit her harder than anything. Her fingers finally lifted, weak and slow, and slipped into his palm. His grip was firm but gentle, supporting her without pulling too hard. Samuel helped her stand. Her legs wobbled, but he steadied her instantly. As he guided her toward his horse, one final murmur swept through the thinning crowd, surprise, confusion, even a touch of disbelief. No one had expected Samuel, the quiet widower who kept to himself, to intervene. And no one had expected him to take Lily under his protection. Lily looked up at him, her voice trembling. Why are you helping me?" Samuel paused, meeting her eyes with a calm honesty that didn't need dramatic words. "Because someone should have," he said. And with that simple answer, he lifted her onto the horse with a care she had never known, as the dusty town watched a starving girl begin the first steps toward a life she never thought she'd have. Samuel walked beside the horse, keeping one hand lightly on Lily's leg so she wouldn't slide off. She sat sideways on the saddle because she didn't have the strength to sit upright. Her head rested against the mare's warm neck, her hair shifting gently with each step the horse took. The movement soothed her, almost like being rocked to sleep, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel afraid of closing her eyes. They left the town behind slowly, the noise fading with each yard they traveled. The shouts, the whispers, the stares, all of it disappeared into the dusty air. Lily felt her body relax a little more with every step they took away. The silence between her and Samuel wasn't uncomfortable. It felt safe, steady, like a blanket wrapped around her shaking heart. The road stretched out long and open, lined with dry grass and scattered stones. The sky overhead glowed a soft orange as the afternoon sun began to sink. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and earth, a smell Lily had always loved but hadn't noticed in her exhaustion until now. She listened to the sound of Samuel's boots crunching against the dirt, slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm of her own breathing. After a while, Samuel looked up at her and said, "Tell me if you need to stop." Lily shook her head. "I'm okay." Her voice was still weak but steadier than before. It felt different now, like it belonged to someone coming back to life. Samuel nodded, trusting her words while staying alert to any sign she might faint. Every few minutes he glanced up to make sure her eyes were open. She didn't notice, but he did it anyway. As they walked farther from town, the land opened into rolling fields, stretched wide beneath the sky. Lily had never seen a ranch before, but she could sense they were getting closer. The air smelled different here, cleaner, fresher, almost welcoming. Finally, Samuel pointed ahead. "There," he said. Lily lifted her head, squinting. In the distance, she saw a wooden house sitting alone on the land, small but solid. A tall barn stood beside it, its red paint faded by years of sun. A few fences circled patches of dry, open ground, and she could make out the shape of a windmill turning lazily in the light breeze. As they approached the house, Lily felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from something gentler, something unfamiliar. Safety, hope, a quiet promise she hadn't dared to imagine. Samuel lifted her down carefully when they reached the porch. Her legs nearly gave out again, and he steadied her with both hands. "Easy," he said. "You're worn out. We'll get you inside." The front door creaked softly as he pushed it open. The air inside was cooler, carrying the faint smell of wood and old leather. It wasn't grand, but it was clean, simple, honest. The kind of place built by hands that cared about the work they did. Samuel helped her to a chair by the table. Lily sank into it with a sigh of relief, feeling the weight of her body settle in a way that almost brought tears to her eyes. She had forgotten what sitting in a safe place felt like. Samuel moved quietly around the kitchen, pouring water into a cup, cutting a slice of bread, heating a small pot of stew left from the morning. He moved with the easy confidence of a man used to working alone, used to doing things with quiet efficiency. Lily watched him, unsure what to say. No one had shown her kindness in so long that she didn't know how to react without trembling. He set the cup of water in front of her first. "Drink," he said softly. She obeyed, sipping slowly, feeling the cool liquid ease the dryness in her throat. Then he placed the warm bowl in front of her. "Take your time." Lily took a small spoonful. The flavor, the warmth, the salt, the softness of the vegetables filled her senses. She didn't realize she was crying until a tear slipped down her cheek and fell into the stew. She quickly wiped her face, embarrassed. Samuel noticed, but he didn't draw attention to it. He simply sat across from her and waited, letting her eat at her own pace. His silence was gentle, not heavy. He didn't pry or push. When she finished, she sat back in the chair, breathing deeply. Her chest didn't feel so tight anymore. Her mind didn't feel so foggy. She glanced around the room, the wooden shelves, the worn rug, the faintly glowing stove. It felt like a home, something she had forgotten existed. Samuel finally broke the quiet. "You can rest here for as long as you need," he said. "No one's going to bother you. No one's going to hurt you." Lily looked at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "You mean I can stay?" He nodded once. "You need a place, I have one. And I could use a hand around the ranch when you're better, if you want to help." Her breath caught, not because of the offer but because he gave her a choice. People rarely gave choices to someone like her. I'd like that," she whispered. Samuel stood and walked to the small hallway beside the kitchen. "Come," he said, "I'll show you the room." The room was simple, a small bed, a quilt folded neatly on top, a dresser, a window facing the morning sun. Lily stepped inside slowly, running her fingers along the quilt as if making sure it was real. "You can sleep here," Samuel said. "It's yours now." A soft tremble passed through her. She swallowed hard and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Samuel nodded again, the corners of his mouth shifting in the faintest hint of something almost like a smile, a quiet warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. He stepped back toward the doorway, giving her space to breathe. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, feeling the weight of her body finally sinking into comfort. Outside the window, the windmill creaked gently. The sky darkened into dusk. The world grew quiet. And in that quiet house on that lonely ranch, a starving girl found the first real moment of peace she'd known in years, while a grieving man found, for the first time in months, that his home didn't feel quite so empty anymore.